Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. To those of you who've been to many CEDA functions, welcome back. And for those for whom this is your first CEDA function, welcome. We're glad you could join us. For our new chums, I'll let you in on a secret. They're not usually like this, but let's kick off anyway. My name's Nicholas Creed. I'm a partner in the banking and finance and restructuring and insolvency teams here at Allens in Perth. We're very busy across our national network at the moment, helping banks and borrowers to navigate these interesting times in which we all find ourselves. We're also publishing on our website an enormous amount of information and guidance on how businesses can thrive in this new environment and on the key regulatory changes that affect every business in Australia. We're also fortunate to have access to the enormous resources and know-how of our alliance partner, Linklaters, and their global network. I said to one of my partners the other day that this is the first time I've been on the television for a long time. He quipped that he hoped I had improved in performance since the Henderson Kids 2 in 1986. I hope I have too, but that remains. Welcome to CEDA's 2020 Resources Update, where we'll be discussing the impacts, challenges and opportunities that COVID-19 presents for the resources sector. We're coming to you live from Perth today, which is of course the heart and engine room of Australia's vital resources sector. But we welcome our audience from around the nation and we'll try to make sure that the session has a national focus. We'll especially welcome questions from our national audience later in the session. Today's event is being live streamed because, like many organisations, CEDA has suspended attendance at public events. However, at this time of significant economic uncertainty, CEDA remains true to its purpose of providing platforms to inform and promote debate on critical issues, and that is why this event is being made available as a live stream. Over the coming months, we'll be making a range of events across key issues available in digital formats to ensure that CEDA members and the community more broadly can access discussion on the most important issues impacting Australia's economic and social development. As details of those events are confirmed, they'll be made available on the CEDA website, ceda.com.au, and I encourage you to check back for those details. We'll also be producing regular podcasts and video interviews with leading experts and policymakers to ensure that you can remain up to date. These will also be available through the CEDA website. Today, just as at our public events, you'll still be able to interact with the speakers through our Q&A portal, which is available via the link on your screen. Click the link and you can add your questions for our speakers and I'll ask them on your behalf. To start today's event, CEDA of course acknowledges that today and every day we are on Aboriginal land, and in my case on the lands of the Whadjuk Nation. Committed as we are to recognition and reconciliation, we respect their elders and we support their stated aspirations. Joining Amanda later on the panel today will be Christopher Reid, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Neo Metals, and in a classic Perth moment, a parishioner at my church, and also Robert Carruthers, Director, Policy and Advocacy at the Chamber of Minerals and Energy. And so now I'd like to hand over to our keynote speaker. Please welcome to the CEDA stage or screen, Amanda Lacaze.
Thanks, Nicholas. I think that this officially makes us all stars of the small screen, maybe not the such large one. But really, it is a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with everybody today, no matter where you are in the country, using this new platform. When I first accepted the invitation to speak today, the primary theme related to the role of innovation and collaboration in the mining industry. And of course, the fact that we're going ahead today is an example of that innovation. The revised brief that we were provided with last week was to talk about navigating disruptions to supply chains, markets, and our workforce as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, it would be impossible to speak on any platform today without considering the effects of COVID-19. But I am also acutely aware that we have a surfeit of news on COVID-19 and its immediate effects. I am sure many in the audience will understand if I make an analogy on the current situation to having a newborn baby. It seems like every day is Groundhog Day and it will never end. But it surely does, and the effort that you have put in during the early days bears fruit later. On a corporate level, I have led 4 corporate turnarounds. In the early stages, it has the same hallmarks as the challenges from the pandemic. It's essential to make decisions each day. It's essential to keep a focus on the future and form a clear view on when you should shift from crisis management to a more normal management mode. Crisis can be very seductive. When every decision seems critical and life is moving at a fast pace, it is only human to feel special and really important. The Australian resources sector is uniquely prepared to implement relevant measures. Health and safety are already top priorities in our industry. And companies like Lynas have well-established safety systems which allow us to effectively roll out new policies and requirements. I'm proud that the industry has stepped up and put in place strict COVID-19 health and safety protocols to not only protect our people, but also our families and, very importantly, our local communities. This has been a coordinated national effort with excellent leadership from our industry bodies, in particular the Minerals Council of Australia and the Chamber of Minerals and Energy here in Western Australia. At Lynas, we now have management, knowledge workers, support functions, and our project teams all working from home. Our leadership team is experienced at working as a distributed team, so this has not been a particular challenge to us. In Western Australia, our technicians and operators are fortunately still able to work on site at our Mount Weld mine with strict new protocols in place. These include pre-departure health checks, temperature checks, physical distancing measures on site, and in our mining camp, additional cleaning and an increased focus on mental health and well-being. I read quite often about communication during these times and any others, and too often I've observed corporates where they think if they've sent out an email to all staff, they've communicated. Communication is actually the definition of what's received, not what is sent. And so ensuring that in all instances we have two-way communication is an important part of ensuring our workforce remains engaged with the business during this time. Of course, as is often the case when forced to take a zero-based view of activities, there are some changes that we've made that, of course, is to say, yeah, well, why didn't we do that one earlier? It's pretty bloody obvious. And so those changes will remain after the crisis passes. You know, one of my favourite sayings is never waste a good crisis. And it's a very good catchphrase as we think about our activities. We've also introduced a new COVID-19 special leave policy and restricted access for our local team to our local town of Laverton. That's to help protect community members, especially the vulnerable members of our local Aboriginal communities. In Malaysia, we have temporarily halted production in accordance with the government's movement control order. We're using the downtime as an opportunity for our technicians to undertake training and operational reviews with a particular focus on safety. When we do get the all clear to start up again, we don't want it to take 3 or 4 days for our workforce to click their brains back into work mode. By undertaking programmed activities and ensuring people who are scheduled to be at work each day have a requirement to log into particular communications or training on each of those days, we will ensure that our staff are current and well briefed on all startup activities. We are continuing to pay all employees, whether they're working on site, remotely, or are currently rostered off. And we have no confirmed cases of COVID-19 amongst our people. We're working with our suppliers and service providers to ensure official advice and restrictions are in place throughout our supply chain. And I want to give a special shout out to our West Australian charter provider, Skippers Aviation, who is supporting the industry's continued safe operation and enforcing physical distance by taping off areas in the waiting area and providing line markings where people must wait during boarding, as you can see in this photo. So notwithstanding all the madness surrounding us, at Lynas we remain firmly focused on our future operations. Our major project is based right here in Western Australia. Well, I'm not actually in Western Australia, but a lot of people are, where we are investing the best part of $500 million over the next 3 years to construct a new processing facility in Kalgoorlie. But just before moving to that, I'll spend a moment talking about our business. Last year, a journalist wrote that thanks to President Trump, Lynas is the most attractive girl at the party, which is a badge that I'm very happy to wear. We are the prettiest girl because until Lynas successfully established its operations in the last decade, China had a supply monopoly on these essential raw materials and much of the value-added processing associated with them. During the trade tensions last year, rare earths came into the spotlight. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted again the risks inherent in relying on a single geography for critical materials. They no longer look cheap when they're not available. So rare earths are often called the vitamins of industry. They matter because of their special properties, which are essential to many manufacturing supply chains. For example, electronics, automotive, and green technologies. As the only proven and profitable producer of rare earths outside China, and the second largest producer in the world, and a trusted, reliable supplier of quality materials to our customers, we provide an important alternative for outside China manufacturers in these high technology markets. Most importantly, in the context of our current challenges, this includes medical technologies and oil and gas refining. We source our raw material from our world-class Tier 1 resource at Mount Weld. We mine and concentrate the material at Mount Weld, and we ship the concentrate to our state-of-the-art plant in Malaysia, where we separate and refine the material. We built our business from the ground up as an environmentally responsible rare earths producer, a fact that is highly valued by our customers. Our Mount Weld mine is one of the world's most valuable rare earths deposits. Favoured by its grade and long life, it is a true Tier 1 resource. Once we mine the ore, we produce a mixed rare earths concentrate on site at Mount Weld. Currently, the concentrate is shipped, I'm hoping I've got that working, to our refinery in Malaysia, which is the largest, most advanced rare earths chemical processing plant in the world. Lynas Malaysia is located in Kuantan on Malaysia's east coast, where we have a 100-hectare site in the Gebeng Industrial Park. The rare earths market, and I think I've got the wrong slide there, but there I'll show you. That's an aerial view of our plant in Malaysia. The rare earths market is an exciting and growing market, and Lynas has a plan to grow with the market. As the Chamber has rightly stated, the role of government is therefore to help businesses survive, help them adapt, and lay the groundwork for a broader economic recovery. And of course, the role of business is to ensure they survive and to adapt and make sure that they engage effectively with government to understand the conditions required for a broader economic recovery. So we've branded our growth project Lynas 2025. No roses for working out, that's because it describes where we want to be in 2025. Our Lynas 2025 project team is alive and well and continuing to work effectively through this new abnormal phase to plan, construct, and ultimately operate our new rare earths processing plant in Kalgoorlie. I've heard for more years than I care to remember that Australia doesn't want to simply be the world's quarry and the world's farm, but to add value to the primary materials we produce. And our project will bring value-added processing to Kalgoorlie and is a first step towards establishing Kalgoorlie and the Goldfields region as a critical minerals processing hub. This new facility will undertake the processing, the first stage processing, cracking and leaching, which is much closer to our mine. And after considering a number of different locations, on the 9th of December last year, we announced that we had selected Kalgoorlie as the location for this new processing plant. And that's the picture that you can see on the screen at present is our current cracking and leaching facility in Malaysia. So, like Mount Weld, Kalgoorlie is in the Goldfields region of Western Australia. The city offers close proximity, well, in West Australian terms, it's only 350 kilometres, to our mine, as well as a skilled workforce and a rich history in the mining and processing industry. In keeping with the conditions of our Malaysian operating licence, we are committed to the new plant being operational by July 2023. Once the Kalgoorlie plant is operational, concentrate from Mount Weld will be processed in Kalgoorlie before being shipped to our Malaysian refinery for further processing. Our project team is working hard to design and construct the processing plant in such a way that it does not replicate what we have in Malaysia, but it improves on it. Building and operating rare earths plants have a very particular set of challenges. It's actually unlike other refinery or chemical processing operations. Without being rude to those who run ammonium nitrate plants, you can virtually buy the plant shrink wrapped on a pallet with a recipe book for how to construct it and run it. But this is not the case with rare earths, where Lynas has the only significant rare earths processing expertise outside China, and it has been hard won over the past 6 years in particular as we have ramped up our plant in Malaysia. So, recognising this, we've established a project delivery format within our business, which we have found significantly de-risks major projects. Under this approach, we form our project teams from our experienced operations staff, backfilling their operational roles. These teams design and plan the project, creating packages of work which are contracted to small and mid-sized firms with specific expertise. In all cases, the project team of experienced operators retains oversight. In this instance, the team is led by Grant McAuliffe, who was formerly the general manager of our Malaysian plant. And the project team consists of subject matter experts, including engineers from our Malaysian team, who have essentially rebuilt this part of our plant over the past 5 years. That's included respecifying materials, redesigning and fabricating key equipment, and redesigning the flow sheet. The expert team are really enjoying themselves, or I've told them they are anyway, as they approach our Kalgoorlie project, where they can build from the ground up using their experience, and they can implement improvements that would be impossible to retrofit in Malaysia. This includes upsizing our kiln, redesigning feed systems, and improving our process flow. And we are looking to adopt 21st century solutions wherever possible, including assessing alternate options for powering our plant. We chose Kalgoorlie because it is uniquely suited for our operations. As I said before, in West Australian terms, it's close to our mine, while providing the foundations for efficient industrial activity. The Kalgoorlie-Boulder City Council is focused on continuing to develop industrial activity in a sustainable way. This extends past traditional cost-based incentives to initiatives such as the provision of recycled water from a plant powered with solar energy. We are particularly keen to work alongside Council to develop a residential workforce in Kalgoorlie, promoting the livability of Kalgoorlie. We expect the plant will create around 500 jobs during peak construction and over 100 new ongoing jobs. And as with all industrial activity, we expect there to be significant flow-on benefits to local suppliers and businesses in Kalgoorlie from the residential workforce. We also look forward to continuing our relationship with Curtin University and the West Australian School of Mines, particularly in the development of critical mineral processing IP. Whilst we have optimised our current flow sheet and have a long life project, we, like every other resource company, understand the economics of resource development and the challenges faced as we move through the ore body and over time into lower grade sections of the resource. We are establishing a separate project team that will focus exclusively on developing process breakthroughs. This team will work alongside our universities, and an early area of focus will be the extraction of rare earths from our tailings, which have about 7% rare earths. That makes our tailings dams, I think, maybe the second richest deposit of rare earths in their own right. Kalgoorlie project delivers on the Australian government's critical minerals strategy and the government of Western Australia's desire for increased downstream processing in the state. We've been awarded lead agency status in Western Australia and major project status federally. Despite this support, we face significant cost and logistics challenges. For example, water will cost us 10 times as much in Kalgoorlie as it does in Malaysia. On another project that we're implementing, we compared the capital cost of construction in Australia to construction in Malaysia. It was 3 times in Australia. So one of the biggest challenges for our project team is bridging the cost gaps. And the only way to do that is with innovative thinking. Our first pass cost indicator could cost up to 25% more to process in Australia than Malaysia. And they can't be delivered via simple commercial negotiations. It requires the team to identify new solutions and to engage with government on ensuring that government does its job and provides infrastructure on a reasonable cost basis. The good news is that we have confidence we can bridge this gap, and if we are really, really smart, maybe we can even improve. We're really excited about the Kalgoorlie project. It's rare to have the opportunity to fundamentally reconfigure a business. That's what we're doing. Project teams working effectively. We're already forging relationships with local suppliers for the execution of the project. And so while it's easy to focus on the here and now as we navigate COVID-19, I think it's more important than ever to have large projects of this type continuing to progress. So when we come out the other side, these kinds of resources projects will assist with the economic recoveries through their investment in regional jobs, critical infrastructure, and contributions to local, state, and federal economies.
To hear an Australian company focused on innovation and value adding for Australia and its local communities. Folks, it's now time to turn to the Q&A part of this afternoon's presentation. I'd encourage you at this stage to follow CEDA on Twitter at CEDA_news. We'll be tweeting from today's event, and the conversation is at the hashtag resources. That's hashtag resources, not the tag that's on the frame. I'd also remind you that you can post questions using our Pigeonhole app, which is at www.ceda.pigeonhole.at, and the passcode is resources. That's resources, all in capitals. So let's move to the Q&A. And a reminder, our panellists are joining Amanda Lacars. We have Robert Carruthers, who is Director Policy and Advocacy with the Chamber of Minerals and Energy, and my friend Christopher Reid, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Neo Metals. A first question from me to each of our panellists, and I'll invite Rob to kick off. What is the issue at the forefront of your mind right now? I hate asking what's keeping people awake at night because I encourage people to sleep at night. But what is the issue that's at the forefront of your mind right now and those of your members, Rob?
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, as Amanda said in her presentation, it's been an incredibly unprecedented event to respond to as an organisation industry that has a lot of focus on health and safety and having the right risk-based measures in place to keep our workforce health and safety high priority, those of our communities and more broadly. but it has been an unprecedented event. I know that's been used considerably over the last number of weeks, but it's been an incredible collaborative and cooperative response from industry across the resource sectors. I think been at the forefront and a couple of steps ahead in its response, and working incredibly collaboratively with governments, state, federal and local in that response effort. It feels like, and I'm an optimist at heart, that we're getting to the end of the beginning in the sense of that urgent, rapid response. And we're now in that new abnormal, to borrow Amanda's term. And it's a really question mark as to how long we'll remain in this new abnormal. So for us, it's about making sure that we continue to focus on health and safety first and foremost, ensure business continuity across the board as we continue to operate in this semi-lockdown environment, and having an eye to the future, looking over the horizon, making sure that we can really seize on the opportunity that will come at the other side of this for a rapid recovery. And it's without doubt the resource sector that will be at the forefront of that.
Terrific. Thanks, Rob. Chris, would you like to take up that question? What's at the forefront of your mind right now?
Thank you, Nicholas, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely, it has to be the physical and mental well-being of our employees and stakeholders. It'd be the number one priority at the present. And you know, we're all practicing self-isolation and distancing, that sort of stuff. All working remotely. That's all seeming to be going along very well. I think, you know, what we do have the opportunity, you know, the mining industry is very powerful. We move at a pretty good pace in terms of how we develop and operate. And I think to take one of Amanda's comments, that we shouldn't waste this opportunity to perhaps pause and then get ourselves positioned for what will be, you know, the breakthrough out the other side of this crisis, and that we can continue the momentum of building our businesses and the nation.
Thanks, Chris. And I certainly agree with those sentiments. Amanda, you've given us a fantastic presentation on what's happening with Linus, but what's really at the forefront of your mind right now?
Actually, not much different from what is generally at the forefront of my mind. In terms of work, our executive team has a shared philosophy. We have a duty to our people, which then translates to returns to our investors. And the first duty is to make sure that our people have a job. There is nothing more value adding I can do in the roles of the people who work for Linus than to make sure they have a job. So in the current situation, that's about ensuring that we are financially sound. We've gone into this in the best financial shape we've ever been in, but we are working really in very fine detail on how do we continue to improve that, how do we really get a good focus and a forecast on what's likely to be the demand coming out of this, and how do we right-size our operations. That will protect our people's jobs. Our second duty to our people is to make sure that they go home safe every night from work. And so that's all of the various processes and policies that we're putting into place around COVID-19. Our third duty is to ensure that they have more skills when they leave the company when they join. And so we have the opportunity within time to stop and really think, to update. We've got a series of deliverables for our knowledge workers around updating databases, knowledge bases, etc. And the fourth is to ensure that people share in the prosperity of the business. So those are the things that are top of my mind every day of the year, and they're still top of my mind today.
It's great to hear a laser-like focus on what you can control and what's important for the business, Amanda. I'll move now to some of the questions that we're receiving on Pigeonhole, and thank you for everyone who's posted. And I do encourage anyone who has a question to post a question to Pigeonhole. They're coming through at a fair rate. I feel like I'm on radio here this afternoon. I've got texts coming in. And Craig from Somewhere Anonymous asks the panel, and perhaps I might ask Chris to first answer this question. What do you think is the likely impact to the minerals sector and demand if the US economy tanks?
Right, Nicholas. If look, I think the consensus view is that there'll be a recession of some sorts coming out the back end, and I think in terms of what Australia contributes to the world in terms of minerals, we are suppliers of the iron ore, aluminium, copper, nickel, the gold boys. So I think we will continue to have active markets for all of our products, and that'll generate foreign exchange earnings. So I think Australia, we are fortunate in that. I think the majority of our products that we mine go to places other than the USA. If you have a look at oil and natural gas, coal, steel, it's heading up more towards our northern neighbours, more so than heading across the Pacific to the US. So I think we'll be largely insulated, or not largely, we'll be less affected by a recession in the US.
Thanks, Chris. Rob, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, export markets, as Chris has said, we're between two great friends in the US and Asia, and our markets continue to be strong on the Asian side of things. The majority of our iron ore going to China, a lot of our LNG being spread across to Japan and Korea as well. And I guess one of the positives out of this, if there is a positive out of the last couple of months, in terms of responding from a health and an economic perspective to coronavirus, is we haven't seen any tapering off of demand, and all shipments into those Asian ports have been unaffected. So it's incredibly important we continue to focus on that and ensure that maintains and capture any of the additional demand that comes on the other side of this. For me, with the US, access to capital, interest rates have historic lows, but that access to capital for the next round of major projects, whether they're sustaining, whether they're major shutdowns that we deferred during this sort of semi-lockdown response period, that'll be key. So I think the US from a capital supply will remain key to our ongoing activities.
Thanks very much, Rob. Amanda, would you like to comment on that? And I might just add an additional question that we've received. If you could comment on the recent change of government in Malaysia and the impact that might have on Linus's business also.
Sure. So on the first point, I think that this has highlighted, and we've taken the opportunity to highlight this, particularly to our North American and North European customers, the risk, the integrated nature of supply chains globally. And so we are prudently planning for the fact that we do expect that there will be depressed demand coming out of the other end of the current crisis. And I think that what's really important for businesses to do is to create operating models where they've got the ability to dial it up or dial it down reasonably quickly in response to that sort of demand. So I don't think any of us know exactly what's going to happen in any of the various economies coming out. If we did, I might be a multi-billionaire if I knew, but I don't. But what I do know is it will not be what I expect. So therefore, I need to create muscle in the organisation and an operating platform which gives us room to actually be able to respond quickly to changes in market conditions. Now, the Malaysian change of government, gosh, what a busy February we had. I sort of say it was like we had, for those who can remember, we had, anyway, Rudd Gillard on steroids, and that was really, sort of the situation with Mahathir and Anwar. And then more to the point, we actually had sort of like Malcolm Fraser, Gough Whitlam and John Kerr all, sort of all happening within the space of a week. I think that what we're seeing in Malaysia is that the new government has come in. There are actually quite a lot of very experienced politicians in the new government, and having sort of more seasoned hands at the wheel, I think, is giving many Malaysians a great deal of confidence. And they certainly have responded rapidly, and I think amongst some of the best practice to the COVID-19 situation. I think that they will be sensible and respect sort of science and the rule of law, as we would expect from a country of the status of Malaysia. And we were lucky just before all of that happened that we were granted our 3-year operating licence, and so we move forward with confidence.
Thanks, Amanda. I'll just turn to another question that's been asked by one of our audience, and I would encourage people to continue those questions coming in. Certainly in Western Australia, but I suspect in other jurisdictions, we have seen a hard border closure, with the notable exception of the exemption granted to the Easter Bunny in Western Australia. Perhaps if panellists could comment on the impact on FIFO arrangements that you're seeing, and how you think that will play out over the short to medium term. Perhaps, Rob, if you could address that first from the perspective of the CME and your members.
Sure. So yeah, a WA border closure is not something any of us would have contemplated a couple of weeks ago, and certainly the Premier made those comments when he announced the decision to move to a hard border closure. WA is unique. It's geographically disparate from the rest of the country, so it does have that unique opportunity to become its own island, and I think we're seeing that the dividend of that in terms of the community infection rates here being quite low. In terms of impact to the sector, as I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of collegiate planning around this from an industry and a government perspective. The border closure was well forecast by the government, so certainly the CME and together with our members, were making preparations weeks prior to that. And we've seen a lot of organisations bringing their critical workforces across from the eastern states and some from overseas to relocate here to Western Australia for the duration of this phase. And most have, as I say, done that. Interstate FIFO, the best estimate that we have, no more than 5% of the overall workforce in Western Australia. It's about 120,000 across minerals, 120,000 total across minerals and oil and gas. So 5% of that is not significant. But having said that, there's a number of critical roles within that 5% where there's a high proportion of those that come traditionally from interstate. So they're the types of train drivers, marine pilots, quite specialised roles that have been relocated over the last number of weeks. And despite the border restriction being in place, there's still an exemption to be able to bring in FIFO workers and their families, so that those who still want to come across and relocate for a period of time can do so, but under strict quarantining requirements. So the fact that the government's got that clause in there still gives us a lot of confidence if there's more workers to come in. And there isn't a time-critical event or an emergency response required, and we don't have the specialist skills in the state to respond to that. There is an allowance to bring in those time-critical, exceptionally specialist skills. So again, really applaud the government in the way that it's gone about the process of closing the border, something that they've really turned around in less than 1 or 2 weeks. So so far, so good in terms of how it's been playing out.
Thanks, Rob. Amanda, would you like to comment on that? You've got workforce in Malaysia and in Australia.
Yeah. Other than to say, I'm not quite sure how under our federation states get to close their borders. But, that's a philosophical thing. I'm a Queenslander, so I understand what Rob's saying about, West Australia's always thought it's a bit different. As a Queenslander, I know we are different. But it's really not affecting our operations in WA at all. We only have a couple of people who are interstate, and they are taking fully paid COVID-19 leave as a consequence of the closure. In Malaysia, it's a little bit more. We have a movement control order, which is probably more robustly administered. So each day when the senior minister briefs, he briefs how many people were arrested on the previous day under the movement control order. It's typically in the range of 500 to 700. A lot of them teenagers who are clearly climbing out the window after mum and dad have thought they've gone to bed. But, so not too many of them are ending up going to jail. But ensuring that our people have confidence and have appropriate documentation to assist them to move through is really the most important thing.
Thanks, Amanda. Chris, is that something you'd like to comment on? I know you're in a more preliminary phase of Neometal's business at the moment, but how is it affecting you?
Look, I've got to say, I can't speak from experience. We sold our operating asset last year and we moved back into the development phase for a number of our other projects. So, we were having remote operations in the field, non-essential in terms of exploration. So we've curtailed those activities, and largely all of ours is off-site in the engineering and test work phases.
Thanks, Chris. I think the next question's quite an interesting one, and perhaps, Rob, I'll invite you to speak first. The question is from an anonymous viewer. What changes would the sector like to see from the state and federal governments to bring forward CapEx, expansion and investment so that they can support the recovery of the state's economy?
I'll thank Anonymous for the question. Our opportunity here, I think, is really fertile ground for reform, and reform that's been spoken about for a long time. So just to take it back one step, Amanda referenced the importance of people and supply chains. So I think they're the foundations of what a strong recovery look like, having the right people with the right skills able to be deployed in the right areas of our industry and across the state and nation, and making sure that whilst travel will remain restricted for the foreseeable future, that we can still be moving people and goods where they're required. In terms of a government response, we'd certainly like to see policy settings that adapt and remove non-essential regulatory and compliance burden, particularly in that recovery phase. There were a number of reforms that were on foot prior to the COVID-19 crisis playing out, both at federal and state levels. So they're easy ones to sort of ramp up with a cadence and really deliver on some of the identified opportunities there. And some of those are very capable of being delivered in the short term. Things like reinstigating a bilateral approvals arrangement for environmental approvals between the state of Western Australia and the Commonwealth. It's something that's existed previously, and it could really reduce the timeframes while still ensuring the same level of environmental stewardship and rigour. But projects on the other side could be reduced by 6 to 18 months purely by going down that pathway, which is well advanced, as I say, before the COVID-19 crisis. And then I think it's this cumulative effect of the death by 1,000 cuts scenario, the various layers of regulatory oversight and indeed sort of fiscal fees and charges at not just a state and federal level, but all the way down to local government. So they're not things that are easily responded to, and obviously governments are going to have a capacity to respond post this crisis. But I think, as I said at the start, we've got really fertile ground to be very outcome focused on what is critically important and what needs to be assessed versus perhaps being a little less focused on process and compliance that doesn't add value or doesn't respond to particular risk factors.
Thanks, Robert. Certainly agree with those sentiments. Amanda, would you like to comment? I see you were nodding in agreement there.
Yeah, very much. I think it's always sexy to talk about engineering and all those sorts of things, but the critical path for us actually delivering our project at present is approvals. And the great risk coming out of COVID-19 is that we have a lot of civil servants who are distracted. And so therefore our approvals process, which is long to start with, gets even longer. So we really appreciate the value from JITSI and being major projects at a federal level, but there's no one really prepared to engage really effectively today because there is so much else on their plate. And so the ability for us to really start to spend big licks of money is very much about the approvals process. So that is really what we think is crucial for governments to be thinking about, is how can they assist the civil service, the public service, to get back to work in a really efficient fashion. On the other hand, yes, I think that there are glaring issues associated to infrastructure and policy, both of which are the real job of government, and that actions taken to deregulate or otherwise have led to unintended consequences and distortions in cost. And I would like to see some of that addressed over time, but really at the heart of it, this point about getting approvals and making sure that we get back to work is an important thing.
Yeah, I've certainly seen from our perspective in the law, the changes, for example, to the Foreign Investment Review Board process is something that we would not want to see continue beyond the period that it's absolutely necessary. And certainly we're in the process of engaging with government to bring about some important and simple reforms to the law, such as facilitating electronic signing of documents, for example. So we're taking the opportunity that we've got to engage with government to make some of those important reforms. I think it's very important, though, and one of the questions we've been asked is what lessons we take from 2008, 2009. I think it's very important that industry and the community focuses its request to government for reform on limited areas, and we don't seek to open a shopping list of nice to haves. Government's got an enormous amount on its plate at the moment. I think industry and the professions can contribute to letting the government know what is needed, but trying not to get overexcited in the push to reform. Chris, did you want to comment on that question of what governments can do to help?
Yeah, sure, Nick. I've got to say, to start off with, I'm actually pleasantly surprised at how well the local, state and federal governments are coordinating their response. I think if we have a look at the exploration industry, and Australia has a very large exploration industry, we need to preserve the exploration companies to preserve those jobs. We can certainly take a couple of month period to collate all that we've done in the last 12 months, prepare exploration programs and get ready to execute those when we are able, when the travel bans and stuff are lifted. And certainly the state government, in terms of allowing exploration exemptions for the COVID-19, recognising we can't actually get on the ground and do activities to satisfy minimum expenditure requirements. I think in effort to preserve the exploration companies' balance sheets, they may need to have a look at suspending the rentals on the mining tenements for a period of time. That then would lead hopefully to a discussion where the local councils suspend their rates on the mining properties. We could have a look at the MRF contributions, given that not a lot of activity is happening. We essentially, the state government self-insures for rehabilitation risk, which is a ridiculously small percentage of actual non-compliance historically. That takes a significant amount of money out of the explorer's budget. So, I think we could coordinate some of the fiscal sort of effects with the mining regs. And, like I said, I'm pleased with what we've considered and what's been happening so far. But I think, you do have to respond hard and then the industry says, well, that's great. And if we can wind it back and it can revert to normal quicker, that's great. Keep the approvals processes going for exploration programs and just have everything ready so that when we can execute our plans and nothing stimulates, local economies in rural areas like drill rigs turning.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a site we look forward to, Chris, and one that we want to maintain. I'm conscious, folks, that we've got 6 minutes remaining of our time. I do want to ask each of the panellists one last question and turn our focus towards the future. We know that from our experiences in crises of the past, that we will come out of the immediate crisis and we will have opportunities to do things differently, to learn from the crisis and to return to a new and innovative and bright future. I'd like to ask each of the panellists what you think is the most important thing that the resources sector can be doing differently when we do come out of the immediate crisis that we're in. So perhaps starting with you, Chris, if you'd like to just reflect, what do you think the industry should be doing differently once we do emerge?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think we should be doing anything differently to what we were doing in the ordinary course of business leading up to this. We just should, use this time to contemplate, perhaps our business plans and our strategies. Use this opportunity to have a 360-degree look at our business, what we can, learn from working remotely and workflows and all of that sort of stuff, and put firm plans in place for our eventual emergence.
Thanks, Chris. Rob, would you like to address that from your perspective and from the perspective of your members? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I'd pick up on comments from both of my respective panellists in terms of not wasting the crisis. So seeing where our strengths have come from when we've had our backs against the wall. And I think, as we've all said, we've responded incredibly well as individual organisations, as an industry, alongside government. And I think that, for me, is going to be the critically important part, is we don't just go back to our normal competitive instincts only after this crisis, that we do maintain that level of collegiality, that we do look at the lessons that are learnt and focus on the round of projects. Because let's not forget that whilst we've just got critical workforces on site at the moment, and that will be the new abnormal for a period of time, at the other side of that, there's going to be a huge volume of non-essential shutdown maintenance that has been deferred. There'll be sustaining projects. There'll be large capital projects that have either slowed down in execution or will be ready to make an investment decision on the other side of this. So if you put all that together and take a very optimistic view, there's an incredible size of the prize there. And that's where I think there's this symbiotic relationship between the success of our sector and the success of our economy, state and national. So it's in everyone's best interest that the resources sector comes out strongly on the other side of this. And if we all have to dig a bit deeper to achieve that, then we should do that together.
Thanks, Rob. Amanda, in about 1.5 minutes, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm looking at the clock on my computer. That's the benefit of this, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think whenever you look at any of these previous crises coming out, there are winners and there are losers. Even after 9/11, there were some airlines and some travel organisations that went to the wall. There are others who got much stronger. And so I think that in the first instance, as a company, as an industry and as a country, we should make a determination that we want to be on the side of the winners. Now, post this, because of the effects, there is no question that there will be more extensive questioning of the benefits of globalisation and the risks of globalisation. And so I think that as an industry and as a country, we should think very seriously about how we can build strategic competitive advantage within a world where some of these things are not givens. And so that's where I would like to see us focused as an industry. And I guess that one of the inevitable consequences is more value adding, less export of unvalue added resources to others to create economic value. And that's less than 1.5 minutes.
Well done, Amanda. Thank you very much. I certainly agree with those sentiments. I think what we learn from previous crises is that those that focus on making things and selling them do well. And the more we make things and sell them in Australia, I think the better for us all. Folks, I think it is time for us to start to wrap up. So there are a few points that CEDA would like me to make towards the end. First, I'd like to thank each of our participants this afternoon for what has been a really impressive and very engaging presentation from everyone. First, Amanda Lacaze, thank you for your engaging and informative presentation. It's great to hear what Linus is up to. And Chris and Rob, thank you for your comments and your perspectives on the issues we've discussed today. Then thanks to all of our viewers. Thank you all for making the time and bridging the logistical gap to participate in today's webinar. And thanks particularly to those who've sent us some really insightful questions. And my apologies, we haven't been able to get to all of them. I would say you are invited to post any additional questions that you have to Pigeonhole for about the next 15 minutes or so, and we'll endeavour to get the panellists to put some responses to those that'll follow around in an email to follow the session. I should also say the session has been recorded and will soon be available on the CEDA website, so you can revisit the session, see all of the highlights, reflect on the glory of the jokes that you've heard, and you can share it with your colleagues and your network via your favourite social media. We do encourage you, speaking of social media, to continue the conversation using the #resources. And a reminder that you can connect with CEDA via LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube and Facebook, and you can stay updated on CEDA's work by visiting www.ceda.com.au. And so a last comment from me. I would encourage you all to retain your own and your organisation's composure and focus on what you can control and what you can do well. And while focusing what you can do in the present, I'd encourage all of us to lift our gaze and our hopes to the future and to imagine and plan for a bright and hopeful future after we are rid of this wretched virus. And so from all of us on the panel today and from CEDA, best wishes to you all and good afternoon.